Hello friends, this is your friend back with a new fanfic. What if Sakura met a mysterious stranger online who changed everything? Episode 2. If you like this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Now, let's start. The first thing I noticed on Wednesday morning was that they were gone, again. I knew this as a fact because the failures were neither in the PE wing or any of the fields, which was where they almost always were. Early the next day I found myself looking up at the wall clock for about the 100th time that hour, anticipating for its hands to strike 12 and signalize lunch. But I wasn't in a stereotypical dull classroom with a dull teacher teaching a dull lesson. Instead I was in the library, spending my free period by volunteering to help with little chores that were to be done, if organizing a whole shelf of books would even be considered little. So far, I've sorted textbooks alphabetically by author, and then restored returned books in their own designated shelves, and now currently headed to one of the many desks to do some paperwork involving records of students' overdue library books. It was voluntary, but I had to volunteer if I ever wanted to gain credits that'll help me into university. Apparently, sorting books chronologically in their racks for over an hour and a half can actually get you somewhere in the future. As I headed over to the large rectangular desk backed up in the corner of the study area by the glass walls, I spotted a familiar old man already there, with scattered papers on his right and a mug of coffee on the other. I hesitated, but the old man already noticed me and smiled, nodding to a chair. "It's all right. Come and sit. The table's more than big enough for two." Nodding politely, I went and sat down about 2 seats away from him. "Ray Watkins." He introduced himself, and it was then that I recognized who he was. Mr. Watkins was a well-known teacher in 12th grade, rumored to be tough as hell. An hour in his Law 12 class equaled to a day in brain boot camp, according to the seniors. He was the kind that everyone dreaded for being so severe, so don't even dare discriminate against him by his years. Though he was old, around his 60s, that businessman-like attire made him look stricter than any ordinary retired old fart out there. "Sakura," I said, as I laid my own pile of papers and folders upon the table. He glanced at them. "Helping out, eh?" I nodded, and he did too. "Good kid. Arf arf." I felt like a dog that'd just done a good sit and roll, but I suppose I should appreciate it, really. A feared teacher like Mr. Watkins probably didn't give out that much compliments to just anyone. A whoop of laughter suddenly echoed loudly through the halls as the school's back doors that led outside swung open, revealing Sasuke and his crew fresh from the fields, still hot and sweating. Even through the thick glassed walls of the library, hence the students' nickname for it, the bubble, their continual chatter still came through obnoxiously. One of them, Sasuke, glanced at me. I could tell he was about to wave his hand, but when his eyes flickered to Mr. Watkins, he frowned and turned his back. I watched as he, along with the others, disappeared into the boys' changing rooms. "Those troublemakers," Mr. Watkins grumbled. "I heard they all got expelled from school." I said. The old man snorted. "Oh, they got expelled, all right. But the reason isn't failing grades, skipping or bullying, all of which I'm sure they've done too. They were expelled because they're criminals. Hitaki and Morino and the government call them young offenders, but really, that's just a code name for future convicts." I figured a person like Mr. Watkins, a highly educated law professor, a decent old man who had the vision to give kids a decent future, naturally wouldn't be fond of teens like Sasuke and them who were rebellious and much too ignorant for anyone's good. "Criminals," I echoed. "Every one of those kids has been in trouble with the law. And I'm not talking about jaywalking or vandalism. I mean serious trouble. Now some dimwits think these failures can change by training a bunch of dogs. They should be sent away, if you ask me. Juvenile court has gone way too soft. We can't even know what the hell those little demons did." Mr. Watkins spat grumpily, they can go around and stab somebody and we won't know a thing about it. They're the ones protected by the law. When the bell rang, Mr. Watkins stood up and gathered his things. Well, I should get going. Complaining about those felons ain't worth my paycheck. Goodbye, Miss Sakura. He left before my mind caught up on everything he said. That afternoon, I saw them in the third block running around the field as always. This time though, I found myself pissed as they'd been occupying a field that was supposedly ours for the day. Grouchily, we all headed back inside. But before completely doing so, I risked one glance back. He was concentrating on getting the soccer ball past the goalposts just like the rest of them, but his focus didn't last long. Suddenly he halted and turned to look at me. We stared at each other for a long-lasting second, before I slipped through the open door and escaped his sight. Today was supposed to be a good day. It was Friday, the morning was bright, the sun was shining, it's not too cold, and my first class went by like a breeze. But I've never had so much difficulty in getting from my first class to second today. There were two routes I chose from. On the second floor through the overpass that connected two of the school buildings, or down out the first building, walk a short distance just by the edges of the field, and then back in the second building. I chose the latter for the sole reason that my previous class was PE, and hot and sweating, I hoped the cool air might freshen me up. But the moment I was out in the open air, the first thing I saw was Sasuke's mob dispersed in the grass playing soccer. That wasn't the worst of it. It wasn't long before I noticed Sasuke himself standing only a few yards away, staring at me as though he knew the exact moment I was to walk out the doors. I could tell this wasn't one of the times where he was affable and responsive, because there was nothing friendly about his expression. Oh, crap, I thought and tried scurrying away from the group unnoticed. But the attempt was futile when I found Sasuke standing on my path within the next second. It's been bothering me ever since the first time I saw you. His eyes were stone hard, like cement itself filled them. I waited for him to continue, knowing his next words in advance. You're that girl who turned me in, he spat. Unpleased by my silence, he took a step forward, and another until he was only a foot's distance from me. He glared down with iced obsidian. In a lighter mood, Sasuke's eyes were the most beautiful thing on earth, and when they gazed at you, they made you feel as though you were as beautiful and special. But now those orbs looked down on me, glaring, threatening. I realized that he was trying to intimidate me, just like how he did back then. And though it worked, the proof of which were my insides uncomfortably churning, I stood my ground. Yes, he was big and looked like he could do some serious damage on me if he wanted to. And yes, he was taller, much taller than he appeared from far away, and definitely taller than the last I've seen him. It seemed unbelievable now that I was once actually an inch or two taller than him back in elementary. But if I ran off, he'd think I was scared, and though I was, a little bit, in no way would I give him that satisfaction of winning. So, I held my voice as firm as I could. You recognized me, didn't you? And if I did, my attempt to sound brave failed. He closed that foot worth of proximity between us. As though we were magnets, both of the same side, I stepped back. When you place the negative side close to another negative, instantly, both will back away. That's what happened. He took a step forward, and out of instinct, I took one back. You don't scare me, I hissed, and lied. Then why'd you pretend you didn't know me? He leaned closer, in front of my face. Huh. Annoyance slowly yet heatedly boiled inside me. The way he thought he could just scare me, who? I could only stare at him. I was shaking, and I didn't know whether it was from fear or anger. I wanted to hit him, slap him, do something. But there I stood like a helpless statue. A hand suddenly landed firm on Sasuke's shoulder, pulling him back. He didn't budge. Let's go, Uchiha, Neji said coolly and reservedly. The hand restraining Sasuke was of a brunette guy who I recognized from Naruto's descriptions was Shikamaru. It's not worth it, Neji stated, flatly. She's a girl. You'll look stupid hitting her. It was only then that I became aware of Sasuke's balled fists, which were shaking noticeably. Sasuke chuckled, yeah, but it sure as hell would feel satisfying, he growled with eyes ablaze. Just drop it, Shikamaru spoke, pulling him back forcefully, and this time, he succeeded. You'll get us all in trouble. You wanna beat her? Do it outside of school. I glared at the pineapple head. He shrugged, muttering, troublesome. Uchiha, get away from her, Sai's voice came to my rescue. He headed in our direction and stood between Sasuke and me. The rest of the guys stopped their game to stare at us, or me to be more exact. Sasuke, completely unaffected by the fact that all his friends had just turned against him, chuckled scathingly, saved again. Huh, princess. He emphasized, spat, the last part with much disdain. I glared. It was all I could do. That, and run away. As I blinked, wet droplets rolled down my cheek. It was only then that I realized I'd been crying, or if not, teary-eyed. In front of Uchiha. Pathetic. They're so hot, Ino muttered as she stared out the window at the subject of her attention. I thought back on the red-haired freak and the boy from my art class who had oddly been staring at a bug, insect, spider, or whatever that black dot had been on his finger. Not hot. Just freaks of nature. I replied, you know they're troublemakers, right? As in trouble with the law. Ino grinned, little Sakura caught up on the news. Suspension program. Stupid. So last week. Everyone knows that it isn't just rules that they broke. Ever wondered just what they did? Ino shrugged, definitely not just cheating on the finals. Probably stuff like bullying or theft or joyrides or something. You sure that's all? Sure. What else could they have done? I don't know, maybe, assault. Like, physical assault. Fistfights. Sure, that could be it. Or something more brutal. I murmured. So what do you think of Neji? No, I mean like, it's weird, isn't it? Hin's family is high class. Decent and respected. Now we find out that her cousin's a felon. She gave a shrug for an answer. And what's with the dogs? Ino looked at me irritated. What's with the questions? Nothing, just thinking out loud. Just as the bell rang, signalizing the start of the weekend. Ino was gone along with everyone, rushing out of the room, eager to be off the school grounds. I, on the other hand, wasn't in much of a hurry. Standing up gradually, I turned to the window next to me and stared upon the same boys Ino had been closely watching a minute ago. Ever since this morning, I had made it my mission throughout the day to avoid Sasuke and his friends as much as I possibly could. So far, I'd been able to carry out that mission successfully. If I were your age, I'd be sneaking a peek too. I swished my head and saw Kurenai with a knowing smile on her face. I looked back at the guys who were out on the field. When Kurenai was my age, she must have gone for the hot, daunting, dressed in black type of guys. Either that, or she was talking about Kakashi, which was rather unlikely since almost everyone knew about the thing going on between her and Asuma. Or perhaps she was talking about the dogs, perhaps not. I decided on the first one. I heard they're lawbreakers. I started flatly when I was sure everyone had left the class. She frowned. Who told you that? Mr. Watkins. I stated. He said they each got in trouble for violent crimes. That they're here for some pointless program that won't do any good. I think he's right. She shook her head. I don't get it, I went on, letting my eyes focus on Sasuke. Why go through all this trouble for a bunch of guys who aren't willing to straighten up? They clearly don't even give a crap about anything. You don't know that. They're young, they can change. I really doubted that. And they do care, or otherwise they wouldn't be here. They had an option. It was this or community service. Almost all the kids chose the latter, which consisted of having to complete a certain number of hours ranging from 20 to 40 each week. This newly established program, on the other hand, is 5 days a week for however long it takes depending on their history. It's a much bigger commitment than garbage duties. So what's with the dogs? I muttered, I don't see how that's going to help. Training the animals takes control and patience, something they need to work on. By changing and taming these dogs, it helps them too. Is that a fact or theory? I asked sarcastically. Kurenai didn't reply. She simply stared at me with studying eyes, as though she was trying to understand my fairly stereotypical, not so complex outlook on these damaged goods that they were hopelessly trying to make better. Did they go to school here now? I asked to fill the silence. No. Some of them, sometimes. I suppose this program had some arrangements too complicated for me. The program is supposed to help them adjust with others. Make friends. It won't hurt. Most of the staff are strongly against it, though. Something in her tone told me she wasn't. But it's safe. They're on constant supervision under Morino and Kakashi. Safe. The word echoed in my mind. Why? Why wouldn't it be safe if they weren't under the two cops' supervision? What will they do? Or in contrast, what had they done? Sakura. I turned to see Sai as he made his way through the thick crowd of students scattered in front of the school. Wait up. The boy was out of breath by the time he caught up beside me. I watched him unresponsively. You shouldn't have stood there like a helpless child, though. It'll only encourage him more. What was I supposed to do? I snapped. Talk back to a bunch of guys who can clearly break my bones to pieces. No thanks. Hey, relax. He recoiled. I'm just saying, you know. You shouldn't have been so scared. Say something really smart and throw him off. Girls do that a lot, don't they? I was about to punch him. I announced adamantly, but the pineapple head got in the way. I paused. And I wasn't scared. Sure, anyway, he wouldn't have hit you. I gave him a look. I think. Okay, so he was thinking about it. But he wouldn't have. He knows the rules. Rules? I asked, now curious. What rules? That's not the point. What rules? I repeated. He sighed heavily, shaking his head. Sakura, he murmured in barely audible volume. You shouldn't be so nosy. Some things are better off unknown. What? I was confused. He shook his head once more. It's nothing. Sigh. Boomed the voice of Morino. He groaned, massaging his forehead almost regrettably. It's nothing. Forget it. I was babbling. I don't even know what I'm talking about. Sigh. I should really go. I'll see you tomorrow, okay? Sigh. I called the third time, but he was already disappearing within the student crowd. I was summoned to the office first thing when I got back to school from the weekend. Am I in trouble? I asked the moment I entered Kakashi-sensei's office. I hoped I wasn't, but the reason why I was here was better because I was currently missing PE, a class which I happened not to mind, and my name had just been announced embarrassingly over the PA system. Kakashi slowly tore his eyes off his orange book to look at me. Sit, this won't be long. I just wanted to talk to you. I sat down. What? He didn't reply, instead he picked up his book and began reading once again. I stared at him, waiting. We remained without exchanging words for minutes that felt like hours. So, he said, finally, Kurenai tells me you know about the program and the boys. By this I was startled. Oh, I said, so that's what this is about. I was a little annoyed that I'd been ratted on. Don't be mad, Kakashi said, reading my mind, it's not only her. Sai too, he's pretty concerned for you. I felt angry at Sai for telling Kakashi just how much he told him. I dreaded to know. Kurenai told you the reason they're here, didn't she? Yes. Because they're hooligans. He frowned. No. Because they choose to be here, to have a second chance. They had an option and they chose the right one. What's so special about this experimental program anyway? It's called the Youth Off the Streets Outreach Program, and it gives troubled teens a chance to straighten up their life again and make friends. It's a bigger commitment. Part of outreach is training a dog that's in line to be put down, that exercises their patience and control, and they go through more anger management sessions than you could imagine. Seems like a waste of time, if you ask me. I mean, what are the chances they'll really change? They're hopeless and dangerous criminals. He looked at me with a disappointed eye, but did not say a word. I squirmed uncomfortably. You really think that about them? But it wasn't them. It was him. He was hopeless. He was dangerous. He was the criminal. I'm sorry about what happened yesterday, he said suddenly, solemnly, when I didn't respond. I gave the boys a good lecture about it. They won't do it again. Sai told you about that too, didn't he? Yes. Joy, I muttered. Kakashi shook his head, defeated. Well, that's it. I just wanted to apologize on behalf of the boys. You can leave. Fine. Just then, I halted in front of his door, holding the doorknob though not entirely twisting it open. A question passed my mind. One more question. Yes, he asked distractedly, his mind now devoured by that orange book. I hesitated. How's that case going? You know, that old man in the alley. Have you found out who killed him yet? Kakashi raised an eyebrow, surprised by my inquiry. He probably expected something to do with the program guys. No, he answered. He wasn't killed. I was puzzled. What do you mean? It was a false alarm, I suppose. He hesitated. It wasn't a murder. According to the evidence found in the alley, the man had killed himself. Uchiha Sasuke. It was in that particular moment when he caught her staring at him from within the library that made him realize why his insides had been churning lately. Much to his irritation, she'd been unconsciously doing that to him these past few days, as if it was his body's reflexive reaction to freeze and tense up every time she was around. An odd, nervous feeling would overwhelm him the moment he saw her, but it wasn't long before comfort and ease would take over whenever he looked up at the green orbs that spread a sense of familiarity in the Uchiha. And it wasn't just every time her presence was near. Every now and then, he would feel her gaze on him from afar as he played in the fields, and he would instinctively show off in whatever sport they were playing. Whenever he saw her, Sasuke felt both at ease and nervous, his mind and chest threatening to detonate at the overload of mixed feelings. She gave an effect on him in a way that no other girl could ever do. And it annoyed him to no end why it was so, since he had never really felt anything until earlier this week when she came along. The answer occurred to him, very much to his dismay, when he saw her with that stupid old man in the library. The old man, Walters, or Watkins or whatever his name was, had been heatedly hating on him and his group the moment they stepped through HL's gates. He was actually about to wave hello but soon saw the old man with her. It was then that he noticed the look she gave him, not any more pleasant and amusingly surprised like it always was. This time, her gaze was the opposite, almost condemning that it bothered Sasuke. It angered him, even when it occurred to him that the change of her outlook towards him was a doing of the old man. The recognition of loathing and revulsion in Sakura's eyes followed afterwards. It was evident even though they were yards apart, so oddly familiar. It wasn't until they entered the changing rooms that realization hit him, why he recognized that look she gave him. It was because he received that exact same look before, from the exact same girl, nearly 5 years ago. Haruno Sakura. Her name was echoing, over and over, and memories involving her annoying pink hair and irritating preppy voice flashed back in his mind. When he caught up with all the memories, finally taking in the sudden realization, he huffed sharply. Haruno Sakura. Now he knew what he felt wasn't because he liked her, a ridiculous conclusion suggested by his know-it-all rival Hyuga Neji and smart-ass Nara Shikamaru. In truth, it was just the opposite of that, the complete and total opposite. Once again, the girl was giving him mixed feelings. He dreaded the war and chaos that was sure to break out between the two of them soon, and in no doubt would be very bothersome, yet a part of him was pleased that she had walked into his life once again after all this time. It would give him a chance to pay her back for all the things she'd done, since he never really got to do that after his sudden obligation to leave. He knew that she knew for quite some time now and had recognized him, but was too afraid to do anything about it. Sasuke chuckled. She couldn't even fend for herself, and needed others to do that job for her. How pathetic is that? Everything about her vexed the Uchiha to no end. The list was endless. How she's so pathetic and weak, how everything just goes her way, how she thinks she knows it all, how she was faultless that she probably never jaywalked or failed an exam, just like how any other normal teenager does at least once in their life, or how she's the little perfect princess her own freaking perfect world. Someone should really talk some sense of reality into Princess Sakura, because she obviously lives in some made-up fantasy that was most likely perfect too. He had been so close to punching the daylights out of her this noon. After years and years of experience starting from the early age of 8, he became so good at masking his feelings that even Sasuke himself didn't realize he was angry until the suppressed emotion exploded, almost exploded, in this case, as he would have really hit Sakura if Shikamaru hadn't held him back. He wanted so much to do it, to make her feel the pain, at least the physical pain of it, because the girl has probably never even experienced a bruise before, never tripped, never scraped a knee, never been hit. And he had, so many times. He knew how it felt very well. What pain is like, what loss is like, the numbness, and Sakura probably never did, and never will because her universe was flawless, vastly worlds apart from the hell he lived in, and the nightmare he never woke up from. Why the hell was everything so unfair? The shocking new information Sir Kakashi told me back in his office was declared on the news both on television and radio throughout the week. Nearly half of the channels included a reporter in a suit saying words along the lines, "Formerly known dealer commits suicide in an isolated alley," or, "Old man kills himself for reasons yet to be found." The old guy was a drug dealer. That was news to me, but it wasn't of any significance. I wanted to watch a movie or a mindless sitcom, anything to get the image of that dead old man off my mind, and the news wasn't helping the slightest. My parents were gone for longer than they promised, something I had gotten used to, and now the house seemed eerily silent. I shut my eyes close, tuning out the voice of the newscaster and even the creepy stillness that surrounded me, and focused on the rapid beating of my heart. It went on speedily circulating blood throughout my guilty self. Back then, more than 2 weeks ago, I would have thought it'd be better off if I kept silent. It was what I thought a safer decision and would lessen the possibilities of being pursued after. That strange car incident was enough to prove to me that being chased by bad guys didn't just happen in movies. The cops would eventually capture those men, I thought, and I would be safe then. But what happens now when, for some reason, everyone believes that false bizarre idea that the old man had killed himself? The police would stop the investigation with the thought that the case was over, and those men would continue to roam about freely in the city. It made me shudder just thinking about it. Even if I had the courage to tell the entire story to the police, what was there to say? Yes, I saw the men, but my account wouldn't be of any help anyhow. I hadn't seen anything, or at least anything that's beneficial. They wore dark hoodies that concealed their faces, but so did a lot of men out there. They had tattoos of strange signs and symbols, but then again, so did a lot of other weirdos. Thoughts continually circulated my mind, and having to deal with Sasuke did not make things any better. However, it was not something I could avoid. He wasn't in school for 2 days and it was starting to bother me why they were away so much, but for that, I was thankful for. My good fortune didn't last. He was back on the 3rd day. In between classes, he tried catching up to me twice, but in both times, I successfully escaped his sight by turning around the corner, and then sprinting as fast as I could to disappear into the crowd. I did manage to dodge him throughout lunch, but I couldn't do it all day. I wasn't that lucky. At the end of the day, I saw Sasuke standing dead still along the hallway with his arms folded stubbornly across his chest. I admit the scene was cute in a childish way, which surprised me since even though Sasuke was cute, a little bit alright, so maybe a lot, he was not at all childish. He was way too scary to be compared to a child. Initially, I thought he'd just positioned on a random spot to brood, but as I approached closer, awareness hit me that he was leaning against a locker that was right beside mine, an act that was too precise to be unintentional. Before I had the chance to hesitate, he tore his eyes from the floor and looked at me. It was too late to turn back then, so I kept my head up and pretended not to notice his presence. I proceeded towards my locker, turning the combination quickly so that his eyes wouldn't catch it. He was awkwardly close, yet I was the only one to feel the awkwardness. He didn't seem to mind the close proximity between us since he didn't move even an inch away from me. I acted tough and pretended not to care as well. The locker door swung to the right, where the Uchiha was located, so I was thankful when it blocked the sight of him as I opened it, giving a bit of a break to relax. Self-consciously, I placed my binder and textbook back on the shelf of my elongated locker, and then randomly organized some things too. I took my time, displeased as I ran out of stuff to relocate, so I took out my lip gloss and started applying some on my lips. I did it perfectly, stalling as much time as I possibly could. I noticed about half of the crowd from 10 minutes ago was gone, and the hallways were slowly being isolated. After there was nothing else left to do, I gave up and closed my locker shut. I gasped, jumping at the sight of Sasuke positioned on the exact same spot I last saw him, still ever so close to me as he was before, staring with one eyebrow raised. He was as tall as me at the present moment, I noticed, but only because he was slouching against the wall of lockers. I took a deep intake of breath in, and slowly exhaled, calming myself and regaining my composure. Sasuke's bangs fluttered lightly at the breeze of my breath. That didn't help my attempt at breathing. His eyes on me intensified deeper, and air jammed my throat. "What?" I blurted. "I wanted to apologize," he drawled out half-heartedly, "about last Friday." I narrowed my eyes. It didn't take a genius to track down the insincerity that enveloped each and every syllable of the sentence. "Okay. Apology is unacceptable." I whirled and walked away. He remained still in his place, watching me with a gaze I felt drilling on my back. Just as I began to think that he was finally leaving me alone, Sasuke fell in a pace beside me and strode in a casual manner like us walking together was a normal occurrence. "Just let me finish, Haruno," said Sasuke. I rolled my eyes. Suddenly, I thought of something incredibly stupid and, to be honest, probably pathetic. But it did no harm trying. After a few moments of walking in silence, I broke in a sprint towards the end of the hall and ran out the school doors. Unfortunately for me, there was no crowd to dissolve into this time. I heard the Sasuke groan several steps behind me. "Stop this foolishness, Haruno," he called out. When I kept on running, I heard him mutter, "You are so annoying." Halfway through the front yard, I heard the doors swing open, and fast-approaching footsteps followed immediately afterwards. The following events occurred too fast. 1 second, the street I was heading towards was empty, but as I neared closer, a car came into view in the corner of my eye, a little too late for me to stop my tracks. My scream blended with the screech of the vehicle's tires against the pavement as it stopped just an inch from shattering my legs and hip bone and perhaps permanently paralyzing me for life. Yet despite that I still thankfully had limbs, they didn't seem to be working at the moment, so I had to lean against the car's hood for support from collapsing right there and then. I was still out of it when the driver poked his head out of the window, yelling a series of profanities. Unable to move, I simply stared at the exploding man, an action that seemed to infuriate him further, until two hands pulled me off the car. The vehicle swept past swiftly and uncaringly a second later. You are so stupid. Sasuke spat each word with rage, shaking my shoulders as if I wasn't already shaken up. Do you even have a brain? Or you? He stopped. When I looked up at him, I saw that his lips had tightened into a thin line, as if trying to hold back the criticisms that I was sure he still had to say for me. He raised a hand, massaging his creased forehead while the other remained on my shoulder, giving me the stability I acutely needed. At least kill yourself when I'm not around, okay? As if you'll actually cast a glance if I bleed to death on the road. His next words, though I had never at all cared about what the Uchiha had to say about me before, affected me in a strange way. You know what? Die for all I care, because, honestly, I don't really care at all. But just for the record, I would cast a glance, at the very least, because I'm not heartless. What do you want, Sasuke? I snapped, my patience running low. I want to, he paused, rephrasing, I have to apologize for last Friday. It was rude of me to get in your face like that. He wasn't even looking at me, he was looking past my shoulder, towards a tree, or air, or who knows what. Do you really mean that? I asked, my tone heavy with sarcasm, for I already knew that he didn't. I have to mean it, he grumbled. I gave a light laugh, guess I can't expect more from someone so shameless. His eyes hardened on me, glaring so hard that I felt a strong urge to back away. Listen, he spat. He'd been uncharacteristically, well, nice wasn't the right word for it, more like civil for the past few minutes, save for his perplexing outburst at my near-collision incident, and it was only now that he began showing signs of irritation and perhaps loath that he undoubtedly felt towards me. You don't like me. Fine. It's not as if I like you either, but just because Kakashi said I have to be nice to you doesn't mean I'm not taking any of your I'm too perfect, I'm higher than everyone attitude. That's bull. You should know that Kakashi won't be around 24/7 to keep me from hurting you. I will, without hesitation. My blood was starting to boil. World War III was about to erupt between the two of us, either that, or it already did. How dare he threaten me? Who does he think he is? And you just said you weren't heartless. Tell me, are threats and violence your idea of fun? No, but giving your clueless mind an idea of pain may prove fairly entertaining. What are you gonna do? I challenged, and then, in a low scathing hiss, I sneered, smash my head on the sidewalk. That hit a spot. I knew it, felt it, even though he was being every bit obvious. Every bit of his body froze with the exception of his balled fists that were shaking with what I could only describe as pure rage. He remained still for the longest time until the shaking began to slow down, and he had somewhat calmed himself. The rage contorted in his face did not leave, though. Disdain returned in his voice, he chuckled. Fighting you would look stupid. And it'll hurt my representative if anyone sees me hitting a little girl. I forced a laugh. Since when did you care about other people's thoughts? As if going back on one hit would all of a sudden change your reputation, which, clearly, is already damaged beyond repair. He stared darkly, leaving me distracted by the hue of his orbs that I didn't notice the proximity between us until he was already 2 inches away from my body. Sasuke leaned down and finally broke his gaze, but this did not give me the relief. It only worsened when I felt his cheek brush on mine and his breath on my ear. It tickled, and I wanted to squirm away, but the magnetism was too much. Whatever happened to the theory of us both being the same side of the magnet, instantly shifting away when the distance was too close? We were, at that very second, opposites, different sides of the magnet, drawn together, one. The moment was ruined, demolished, when he spoke. I'll hurt you, he whispered. I closed my eyes as a shudder traveled down my spine. What the hell makes you think you're any special, that I won't have guts to beat you up? What the hell makes you think you're better than everyone, than us, than me? News flash, Your Highness, no matter what your parents told you throughout your childhood, you're not special and you're not better. You can disappear, and the world will actually still revolve without you. You aren't that important. Get it? You mean nothing. Nothing, especially to me, so don't even think for a second I won't hesitate to follow through my threat. Now go screw off and play princess. Ouch. Ouch, 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 ouch. For some strange, stupid, infuriating, unknown reason, that hurt. But all of a sudden, the aching pain focused on my knuckles, spreading throughout my fingers as Uchiha Sasuke's face collided with my fisted hand. He swore, staggering backwards, but this moment of weakness didn't last as long as I hoped. Being experienced in the area, he quickly regained control and within a second, I was down on the ground, breath knocked out of my lungs. I couldn't breathe. For one thing, the sudden ache that shot throughout my back took me by surprise, and its numb yet painful soreness spread out much too sprawling to be pinpointed in just one spot. Sasuke had slammed me hard on the concrete ground, and though I knew for a fact that this act was no surprise, that this was just so Sasuke, I was startled, disappointed even, and afraid. For another, Sasuke was basically sitting on me in the most uncaring manner, but again, that's just him being himself, and he wasn't exactly who I'd call light. Sasuke's weight crushed my stomach and ribs, and it was too hard to open up enough space in my chest cavity to take in the adequate amount of air that I desperately required at the moment. Hands shot out from nowhere. A pair caught Sasuke's descending fist, stopping it before it fully hit me and permanently damaged my face, and another pair of hands heaved him back. It was Sasuke's pack that had intervened, coming from nowhere to my rescue within a second. It took two of them to restrain Sasuke from putting me in a comal state, while it only took one arm of the pineapple head to hold me back. The boy appeared so at ease that I wondered how weak I actually was at the moment, and then thinking how little chance I actually had against Sasuke, I assumed it was around the negative hundreds. Sasuke was yelling an endless chain of profanities, mostly to me, and sometimes shouted at Kiba and the bug boy from Art, Shino, who were both withholding him, to let him go. They didn't, thankfully. The guys hauled him back towards a van that was parked on the north side of the student parking lot, scolding him, but Sasuke wasn't listening. Instead, he was lost in his own world, with me as a subject, muttering the phrase, "annoying bitch," over and over again. Kakashi hadn't lied when he said the guys were under supervision at all times. Even during the fight, or, to be more fair, me punching him and then getting my butt saved by his friends when I thought he wasn't around, well, I was right, he wasn't. Kakashi stood at the second floor of the Fine Arts building right beside a window that clearly overlooked the front yard of the school. He saw that I had been the one to hit Sasuke first, and I admitted that, but Kakashi didn't seem to be very concerned about that fact. If pleased was overstating it, then he was at the very least amused. Anyway, he minded more about how Sasuke attacked me, made a bigger deal on his faults instead of mine, and I wasn't complaining. I was called, via PA system again, to the office the next morning. It was my second time within the last month, and it effectively broke my previous record, 0. So, he began when I entered his office. That was, quite entertaining. It was his fault too, I said quickly. I know. I already talked to Sasuke. He acknowledges the fact that he had a part in it. His voice sounded solemn, and he looked down, like he was recalling something. Good, I stated. He frowned for a split second, and then shook his head. It wasn't all Sasuke. You were the one who punched him, and though I think it did a positive damage on the boy's ego, you shouldn't have, so there are consequences for you as well. I took a deep breath, waiting for the rest. I'm phoning your parents, plus an in-school detention, during break, lunch, and an hour after school for a week. You'll either be glued to the chair or helping the teacher, whichever works for the supervisor. Would he be there too? No, for a monosyllabic word, Kakashi stretched it out far more than necessary. Sasuke's taking a bit of a break right now. He won't be back for a while. Kind of about the time his parents did some disciplining, don't you think? In a low voice he said, his parents weren't the one who made the call. I did. So what? His parents finally realized the pointlessness in disciplining the hopeless wild child. I asked, adding a hint of humor, but Kakashi hadn't found it funny not a bit. His eyes hardened, and for a moment, I was terrified. His patience for me reached the point of zero, and though he looked calm, the rush of words that came out from him showed the opposite. No, his parents did not realize the pointlessness in disciplining him, because he doesn't have the satisfaction of having parents who are alive and can be there to instruct you what and what not to do, or who can punish you when you did the wrong things. Oh, right, Sasuke. Orphan. How could I have forgotten? He doesn't have any close family to live with either, except for one, but he is ineligible. Sasuke lives alone. He's, what, 17? Is that even legal? I couldn't help it. When you live with a lawyer and a former police officer, you tend to memorize just about all the national laws there are, both what's legal and not. He resides in a group home with some of the kids in the outreach program, kids who share a similar background to Sasuke's, lives that didn't turn out so great, Kakashi explained. It took me a second or two to take in the information he had just loaded onto me. Sasuke's parents being gone, Sasuke living in a group home, the latter surprised me, in a way. If Sasuke's was gone, I guess I sort of expected him to be staying in a big large mansion, recklessly wasting all of his inherited wealth, rather than residing with a bunch of his kinds which, now that I think about it, was a very expected future for him. It was just so, Sasuke. I never knew that. Kakashi sighed heavily. There are a lot of things you don't know, Sakura, that's why I ask you to be considerate. Sasuke, not just him, but every one of these guys, they've experienced much more of the bad side of the world than you have. You don't understand, but at least consider their side before you judge. So this is my fault now? I asked defensively, just because my life isn't as screwed up as theirs. As Sasuke's. As he sat there, frowning, staring at me, it was obvious what he was thinking. He hadn't even tried concealing it like he most usually does. Evident all over the surface of Kakashi's solely visible eye was disappointment, exclusively directed to me. Sasuke didn't show up for school that day. He wasn't there the next day either, nor the day after that. The weekend passed and I still haven't seen him. It wasn't like I was waiting for him or anything. Nope. It was, as I've told myself time and again, plainly an observation. His absence was consistent. Never was Sasuke with his friends anymore when they ate in the cafeteria, or used the school fields, which were the only two things they did here. Now and then I'd see the guys hanging around the sidewalk at the rec center, or just outside its entrance, usually as I'm arriving from school, but Sasuke was with them at neither times. But I had to admit, without Sasuke's presence lingering around every corner like trouble ready to pounce, it had been more comfortable for me, and it felt like I was in my school again, good old HLA before the intruders came. Ironically, though, I'd gotten to know some of those intruders, like Kiba, during the period of Sasuke's absence. That did not change much though. As individuals, some were okay, but I wasn't friends with all of them, most I remained to keep a safe distance from. As a whole, they were still generally who I'd call troublemakers, okay or not. I met Kiba once through Naruto after school one day. I only spoke a single word to him in total, which was, "Hi." And I'd remained silent afterwards, but already I liked him. He was better compared to the other guys he normally hung out with, and it wasn't just because he owned the cutest little puppy. He was almost as friendly as Naruto, almost as nice, though at the same time, almost as annoying and obnoxious too. Their chemistry was obviously the reason for their friendship. How they could stand each other though, was beyond my comprehension. From Kiba through Naruto, I discovered quite a few things while Sasuke was, as he said, gone. For one thing, I learned Sir Kakashi had a lot of dogs. I mean, a lot, more than he would ever admit. And these dogs that they were training were his. I found out that he likes dogs too, and handles them well, which was good to know, since that meant Kakashi took interest in something other than pornography. They were divided in two groups, one handled by Kakashi and another by Morino. Only Kakashi's group worked with dogs. Morino's troop sometimes did, but mostly they engaged in strict discipline and army-like exercises, which were Sai's own words in describing Morino's ways. Another thing, these guys get way more counseling and anger management consultations than us academy students get those extremely boring literary improvement talks. I found out about that from Kakashi, who apparently does all the talking in those discussions. When I had asked about Sasuke, of course, I always did so indirectly. Not that I always asked about him or anything. Kiba always said he was gone. The same reply I got from Kakashi when I asked him. Well, no duh, he's obviously not here. Gone where is what I'd like to know. One time though, Kiba grinned and replied, let's just say Uchiha's not exactly all that thrilled to show off his new black eye. Especially since it came from a girl. Then, he'd wink and say nothing more. Nevertheless, I wasn't entirely happy about Sasuke's absence either. Something was missing without him. Maybe it was the tension I'd grown accustomed to whenever he was around, or maybe it was the lack of something to stare at outside the window during classes. Either way, it was bugging me, and all this unhelpful saying that he was gone is beginning to make me think he's dead, and so that bugged me even more. What bugged me most was the fact that in my mind, I was looking for Sasuke, wanting to know where he was, when all the while I wanted him gone, out of my life once again. The tension of opposites. All in all, it had been an incredibly sluggish, lazy, unproductive week, excluding the meeting Kiba and adorable Akamaru part, full of mind-numbing in-school imprisonment supervised by an incredibly weird teacher. Really, his name shouldn't be Guy, it should be Gay. And so it was a relief to find a new message blinking on my desktop when I logged on, from a certain someone who, for some reason, was currently making my heartbeats faster. It was only then that I noticed the rapid beating in my chest. I felt my face warming up, and I bit my lips to prevent a smile so wide it hurt my cheeks. Why did he have such an effect on me? I told myself again and again that this was over the internet, and the chances of him meaning the things he said would be in the negatives. Besides, his username included Rogue, and didn't Rogue mean someone insincere? But for some reason, for a lot of reasons, I couldn't imagine him a rogue. He wasn't. And he was able to make me forget about my crappy week. Quickly, I right-clicked the rogue's name and clicked send an email. To Rogue, from Lil Pinkchick at hotmail.com. You did cheer me up. Thanks. I hesitated, before adding Sakura. I clicked send before I had time to change my mind. In a way, I hoped that, since I signed my message, he would sign his, and I'd be able to find out his name. Almost immediately, a reply came. To Lil Pinkchick, from Rogue Anons24 at KSS. Adieu, calm. Anywhere, anytime. Feel better, Sakura. Well, that was just unfair. He didn't tell me his name. But that didn't really matter at this moment, because, at the moment, my heart was fluttering, I was blushing, and my stomach had butterflies, in a very cheesy way like in those romantic movies. Yes, I compared it to a romantic move, because, honestly, that's what it felt like, yet at the same time, I felt utterly pathetic. Because, really, how stupid was it that I'm crushing on a mystery boy from the cyber world? I was comparable to the Walking Dead the following morning, a result from waking up every 10 minutes or so and sleeping restlessly in between the last night. My brain was overfilled with Sasuke and the fact that he'd gone missing without a trace, and I couldn't get my mind off a particular stranger either, no matter how hard I tried. The bags under my eyes must have been apparent since Ino, usually the last person to notice something that doesn't involve herself, commented about how hideous I looked the very first thing in the morning. Miraculously, the moment I entered my first class in the morning, Choji noticed too, which meant he actually made the effort to look away from his bag of chips and actually think of something other than food, for instance, how horrible I looked. "Have you looked in a mirror lately?" he asked politely, though I could sense the sheer sarcasm behind the words. I twitched. "No." "Oh. Well, good, don't, at least not when I'm around. I don't want to go deaf once you do." "Shut up," I growled, slumping onto my seat as the teacher began talking. It was art, and it was a miracle I was even able to concentrate long enough to hear instructions. It was a free sketch, basically meaning you could draw whatever you wanted. In a way, it was sort of a free block, except your work had to be handed in by the end of the block. And so, I grabbed a pencil and paper and let my mind and imagination carry me away. As though Sasuke's prolonged absence and crushing I refused to think that I was falling in love on the cyber rogue hadn't strained my brain enough yet. Seeing the constant news about a murder of an old man now being declared a suicide did not make things any better. It caused the resurfacing of unwanted memories and a nagging guilt of that afternoon nearly 2 weeks ago. And there was nothing I could do to avoid it because it was all over the news. The old guy, apparently, had been wanted long ago, known for dealing drugs, and the cops couldn't find any reason that he'd want to kill himself. Of course there was no reason, I thought to myself, because he didn't kill himself. Stupid cops. Gosh. But then, I stopped myself. It had nothing to do with me. That gang probably already forgot about me by now, who would remember a pesky little girl? And so it was all three of those merged together, swirling round and round in my mind that kept me from sleeping last night, the same thing that was keeping me from concentrating on my current work right now. Suddenly remembering my work, I looked down on my paper, only to see an insignificant streak, scrawled across the white sheet. At first, I stared blankly at it, until something in the back of my mind clicked and I realized what it was. Quickly, I crumpled the paper and shoved it deep in my pocket. It was that symbol, or dirt, I saw tattooed on that man's wrist, the one hidden in the alley's shadows, whose image was still as chilling as it had been before. Just thinking about him, I felt my anxiety increase, like a snake gradually creeping up my back. Then, my thoughts halted. Snake. Snake. I pulled out the piece of paper, and stared at the squiggly line with a dot on top. That was it. It was no meaningless squiggle. It was a snake. Underscore. Nara Shikamaru. That was one awesome hit she landed on the Uchiha, Shikamaru thought. He almost admired her, almost, if she wasn't so troublesome to hold back. The girl had a monstrous strength that made him wonder if she was even a girl at all. Most of the guys were in awe of her, which really pissed off Uchiha, not that he wasn't already pissed off in the first place. It served him right, and as much as Shikamaru would like to rejoice at the sight of Uchiha's evidently bruised ego, he couldn't. Since now, the so-called great prodigy was grumpier than he originally was, he loses his cap at the smallest things, he slams their room's door at friggin' 1 in the morning, he's too busy sulking that his stuff was everywhere, and he acts like a cranky old hag, all because he couldn't accept the fact that little candy girl punched him square in the face. And what's even more troublesome was the fact that Shikamaru had to deal with Sasuke's crabbiness even more than the others did, since he shared the room with the prodigy. Ah, Shikamaru thought, this is such a drag. What is that? I whirled my head around, startled by the voice that had suddenly thundered into my thoughts. Looking up, I saw Sai staring at me with a raised eyebrow, evidently puzzled and amused by my alarm. He was tilting slightly to the side as he tried to get a glimpse over my shoulder. Actually, he wasn't trying. He already had a clear and steady gaze on my sketchbook. Instantly, I snapped it shut. Nothing, I replied too quickly. Calming myself, I spoke again, though slower this time, more in control. Doodles. Random things. I'm just brainstorming right now. It was much easier to control the pace and level in my voice than that of the swarming thoughts of my recent, sudden realization. It sent chills throughout my body, although I did not quite know what difference it gave. No, I did know. Now I knew something, a symbol of something, them, or perhaps their leader, or their cult, whatever they were. Though it wouldn't exactly help the police track them, at least they'd know who to look for, and that there were people to look for, rather than the unconvincing conclusion that cops had at the moment. I asked myself, what now? Tell and be useful, and possibly be in danger. Or not tell, and be useless, although certainly safe. Sai didn't give me the chance to decide on my thoughts. Before I got further carried away, his inquiry brought me back to earth. But you've been working on that one for an hour now. An hour? I'd been lost in my mind for that long. Finally, he turned away from my closed sketchbook and looked at me as though I was the weirdest person in the world. And by my current actions, I probably appeared like so. What's it supposed to be anyway? You've only got 15 minutes left. I'll manage. I snapped. Okay, you hag. Rolling his eyes, he leaned back on his seat. Don't need to get all cranky. Then don't bug me. I'll always bug you. Always. He reasoned, as if that itself was solidly rational. So what's up with you today? Nothing. But, he bit back his words, his mouth suddenly forming an O, as though he had all of a sudden realized something significant, something that explained all. However, just as I thought he'd finally begun to comprehend my lack of patience, and that I was not in the mood to tolerate any of his conceitedness, his following words proved me wrong. Oh, he said with much understanding, it's that time of the month, huh? So that explains why you're extra hideous today. I growled, sending him glares that he was surely immune to by now. Customarily he tilted his head in a slight manner and smiled, just as he always did when he knew he'd won the recent quarrel. But something differed this time, something I couldn't quite put a finger on. I was back in detention later that afternoon, but Asuma, who regularly locked me up in a classroom and forbade me to do anything for more than 2 hours, and the one who usually supervised, wasn't there. Guy had filled in for his spot today, something that I was grateful for, given that the bull-haired teacher was undoubtedly more lenient. I helped Guy arrange the PE equipment and set up V-ball nets for a tournament that was being held after school. Though the work was exhausting, it was undeniably better than boring myself to a state of deadness. At least setting up the courts gave me some kind of distraction, something else to focus on other than the word snake and tell, the only 2 words that were wedged deeply in the caverns of my mind throughout the whole morning. The downside of it, Kin had PE in that very same block, which meant I just happened to be at the receiving end of all her dirty looks for the entire hour. The girl completely loathed me, as I did her. The tension began in a small, rather unimportant volleyball tournament that I won, and she lost, back when I was an 8er and she was 9. She had exploded, enraged by the fact that a little freshman, and I meant little, as in less than 5 feet, had outdone her. Long story, but it went on from there. Sometimes she sent me, as childish as it was, hate mails. They were nothing but empty though, seeing as Kin had never followed through with her threats. Anyway, I finished half an hour before the dismissal, so Guy gave me free time for the rest of the block, just so long as I stayed in the library. That was fine with me so long as I was out of sight from the bratty Kin. In fact, it was more than fine, and since the library had computers, the very first thing I did was sign on my messenger. Almost instantly, a window popped up. I pondered on his words for a moment. Talking to him did not give me the assurance I both needed and expected. Initially, I thought he'd tell me to tell the cops, because throughout the time I spent chatting with him, I got the impression that he was a good guy. Now, clearly, I had to reevaluate. I frowned. After a while, unpleased with my lack of response, another instant message came up. Something changed. My heart was beating furiously, the usual aftermath at every end of a conversation with the rogue. However, this time, it was due to anxiety. I sat back, fighting off the shudders that were climbing up and down my back. What just happened? Opening the message archive, I read over our preceding conversation, checking to see if it wasn't only my imagination, if our chat had truly transpired the way it did. As I scrolled further down, the last message at the very end caught my attention. The demand, because it surely did not sound anything like a suggestion, echoed repeatedly in my mind. Don't be a grass, Haruno. I read it over, again and again, staring at the particular line, until I realized something out of place, something that did not make sense, and instantly my stomach began churning. I never told him my last name. I spent my after-school time in a clogged-up classroom, trying to catch up on every lesson and homework I missed while I was away being tortured with sheer boredom and isolation, though of course isolation was much better than spending time in the presence of other troublemakers. That was part of my routine now, to go to at least 2 of my classes every day after school and get as much work done as I could, because if I didn't, and wait till the end of the week, I'd most likely be buried alive by tons of homework packages. At one point, I looked out the window and was surprised to see the program guys out in the field with their dogs. Sasuke wasn't there, though. Really, I should be getting used to his non-attendance by now. Perhaps he wasn't coming back, and that was good. I persuaded myself, he'd be out of my life again. On the other hand, there shouldn't have been reappearance in the first place. I focused back on my worksheets. Without Sasuke, there wasn't much to look at, and I wasn't about to stare at a bunch of strangers. After 20 minutes or so, they finally left. It was around 4 o'clock when I finished as much as I could and left the school. There were no more students left in the building, and if there were, they were probably stuck in a classroom making up work just as I did. I was free, at least for the rest of the day. Exiting the school, the cool autumn breeze passed me, and I inhaled dramatically, taking in the peaceful sight of the empty schoolyard and softly whipping orange leaves across the grass. However, as my eyes swept over the entire area, I realized I was mistaken. The school's front plaza wasn't empty. Only a few yards away before me, leaning against the railing of the entrance stairs, unaccompanied, arms crossed and head bent down, was the redhead freak. Or as Sai called him, Gaara. Either way, he was still rather creepy, and proved more so when he looked up slowly, and stared at me. I squirmed uncomfortably. Where was the rest of his posse? Hadn't they left already? If so, then what was he doing here? Alone. Brushing off the mental questions aside, at least for the moment, I stood up straight and strutted right past the redhead as if he didn't exist. In the corner of my eye I spotted his gaze following me until I could see him no more. Once out the school complex, I entered a narrow trail in the woods. It was a common trail that students passed through every day, thus it wasn't normally as isolated as it was right now, but it had been more than an hour since our dismissal, so it only made sense. However, it didn't feel as solitary as it should have felt, being by myself in a mass forest. After a few more minutes of walking, the impression that I wasn't alone only grew stronger. A thought, a gut feeling, began to develop in my head, and suddenly, I got the inkling that the area was not as isolated as it appeared. Instinctively, I looked back and saw, with much surprise, an indistinct image of an individual far down the end of the path, lagging behind several meters away. Hands were tucked in his sweatshirt's pockets and head hung low. Clearly this was not a person who wanted to be seen nor recognized. His outfit, probably supposed to serve as his camouflage, had ruined his disguise. The all-black attire had done none but only draw more attention to the crimson strands that stood out noticeably, jutting from underneath the dark hood that did a good job of concealing one's face, except that didn't matter. I'd know that bloodshot hair color anywhere. Gaara. I snapped my head back facing front, wondering why in the world Gaara was following me. Maybe he wasn't, I tried convincing myself, although it was obviously otherwise. Unconsciously, my pace accelerated, and the distant sound of footsteps behind me did the same. A thought suddenly crossed my brain. When the guys came to the cafeteria on their first day, Gaara had been staring at our table. Similarly, I caught him staring when I'd been talking to Sai out in the courtyard a few days ago. Now, this. I came down to only one assumption. Gaara was stalking me. For a while, I pretended not to have noticed him. We walked in an eerie silence for a few minutes, but never once did Gaara try to catch up to me. He always kept a steady couple of yards away, striding the same pace as I did. Eventually, I got fed up with our little cat and mouse game. The trail took a sharp turn to the right, and, following it, I stood around the corner, letting the thick bushes conceal me. My wait wasn't long. In no later than a minute, a red blur appeared and at once, I jumped out of hiding and shoved the hooded figure to the ground, or, to be more specific, tried to shove. In what seemed like a reflex, Gaara caught my arms, holding them firmly to my side as he rolled over and fastened me to the ground. The action was similar to that of Sasuke's, however, there was a slight dissimilarity. It didn't hurt as much, or actually, it didn't hurt at all, when Gaara slammed me down, or, expressly, placed me down, on the ground. Using his arms, he supported himself so that his weight wouldn't crush me, in large contrast to what Sasuke had done. All the same, I still found myself in an almost identical situation I was in not that many days ago. Really, I should stop jumping onto people who were clearly twice my size and strength. "What the hell are you doing?" he asked astutely. My cheeks burned, from anger or humiliation, I didn't know. "What are you talking about? You're the one on top of me. You're the one who pounced on me. Am I really that irresistible?" Managing to slip my hand out of his grasp, I reached out, but he grabbed a hold of my wrist again before I could hit him. "Whoa, temper," I glared. He didn't seem to mind, though. "You have a lot of courage for someone who's pinned to the ground," he added. "Will you get off me?" I shrieked. Okay, I'm off," Gaara said hastily, before I began freaking out, and got up. He silently watched as I did the same. Quickly dusting off my clothes, I turned to him. "Stop stalking me," I snapped. For a few seconds, Gaara only stared as though he had not the slightest idea what I was talking about. Finally, he replied, "I'm not stalking you." "Oh," I asked suspiciously, "then why are you following me? I'm going the same way you are. I live a couple of blocks from your house." "Then how do you know where I live? I see you walking home when you pass by the community center." He replied like I should have known that. Then again, I really should have, since I saw him and the guys at times whenever I walked home from school. "You were watching. And you keep staring at me at school too. Sakura, you have hair that's pink. It's kind of impossible not to stare. So how do you know my name?" I questioned once more, unwilling to give up. "The Uchiha talks about you," he replied casually, then muttering, "a lot." Oh, I was astounded, least to say, and for a moment I ran out of questions, until another one came up to me. "What does he say?" Gaara smirked. "That you're annoying." I twitched. "Yeah, well, he's a jerk. I'll make sure to tell him that." "Good." I snapped, and suddenly paused. You've seen him. I live with him. Ew. I blurted before I could stop myself. Gaara rolled his eyes. Not like that. We live at the same pace. The other guys do too. We go to the same school. But I haven't seen him in school for days. Then, as if sensing my thoughts, he explained that going to HL was only whenever they needed a spacious field, or apparatuses to work with. You don't attend hidden leaves? I asked. He shook his head. Hell, no. The academy's way too bratty. I'd freak out if I had to go there. He seemed to have forgotten that before him was a student of that very academy. We go to Konoha Secondary School, the one by the wreck, or, to be more specific, Konoha Secondary. I've heard the name, I knew it was a school, but I never really knew where it was. I never even knew there was a school inside the community buildings, or next to them. On the other hand, the recreational center was a little overly sizable for it to just be what it was, and I've always wondered what the extra building beside it was for. Now I know. Eventually, we came to the conclusion that he had not been stalking me, and though I was a little doubtful, I let it go and proceeded walking home. Somehow, before I even realized it, Gaara had wound up ambling beside me. While I fidgeted uncomfortably, he was very at ease, as if us walking together was only typical. The rest of our walk took place in silence, and that was fine with me. I was pondering the things he said about Sasuke, or, specifically, the things he said Sasuke had said. He talked about me. The fact caught me off guard. I thought Sasuke had spent every minute trying to forget about me. He must have been complaining, then. Like Gaara said, Sasuke thought I was annoying. Gaara halted, but I kept walking with the thought that he'd catch up. He didn't. I turned to him. What's the holdup? He stared at me for the longest time. Then, finally, he nodded over to his right, where a neatly designed 3-story structure was planted. My house. Oh. I walked back to where Gaara was standing, trying to hide my reddening cheeks in the process. After slipping through the small black gate of our front yard, I gathered all the confidence I had left, which wasn't a whole lot, considering all had been drained the moment I realized I just passed my house, and looked up to meet his eyes, which were deep green. If my eyes were stated to be emerald, his were malachite, darker and gorgeous. I looked away quickly, before I drooled on the spot and embarrassed myself further. Bye. I muttered. His eyes never shifted from mine. I could still feel him staring. Bye. He replied, unmoving. He didn't depart as I expected him to. Instead, he stayed put, as if he was waiting for something. Well, if he was waiting for me to invite him in, he was in for a disappointment. I whirled and crossed our yard without bothering to follow the pebbled trail. Thank goodness my parents weren't at home. Otherwise, I'd be in big trouble for stepping on the lawn. By the time I got to the door, Gaara was still in place, watching me. I turned to him and waved. After he waved back, I slipped inside the house. Quickly, I kicked off my shoes, took off my jacket, dropped my bag, and ran towards the window adjacent to the door. Looking out, Gaara was already walking away. At that moment, it occurred to me what Gaara had been doing earlier on. Initially, I thought he simply chose to stand and stare like a creep, when, actually, he had been waiting. Waiting for me to enter the house, and hadn't left until he was sure I had gotten in safely. In some way it reminded me vaguely of how a typical protective boyfriend would act when walking home his girlfriend. Unconsciously, I gave out a dreamy sigh. I went to the kitchen to grab a can of soda, got up the stairs, entered my room, dropped my bag on a nearby counter, and sat down before the computer on my desk, all of which I'd done with a dazed mind and a heart that still fluttered unreasonably. My odd actions or reactions stopped altogether in the precise moment I signed on. Almost immediately, a message popped to my screen, and, reading it, I'd forgotten all about the certain redhead and the somewhat positive effects he'd given off. My full attention focused on the singular message flashing unread on my screen. Fine, I thought, if he wanted to snoop around, secretly gathering information, then the two could play the game. As soon as the idea popped into my head, I seized the black mouse beside the computer and quickly followed through with the thought. I scanned through my contacts until I found the rogue's username. I right-clicked it and viewed his profile. Almost instantly, a new window popped up, along with an image of an exclamation mark inside a red triangle. Profile viewing disabled. Well, that's just great, I thought sarcastically. Wait, he said he'd been on Friendster, as well as Multiply. Both sites had installed applications that enabled users to track whoever had been on your page. Quickly, I went to my viewing history on Multiply, scanning it for anyone foreign that might have viewed my page for the past week, until finally an icon titled Rogue caught my eye. I clicked it. Opening parenthesis exclamation mark closing parenthesis. User, Rogue, does not exist. I frowned and navigated to Friendster to find out if anyone unfamiliar viewed my profile there. The Rogue was the first one in the list, being the user who was recently on my profile, just a day ago. The account was active when I clicked it, but it might as well have been inactive. The profile was completely blank and perhaps the only detail available was the basics. Name, Rogue, gender, male, useless information that I already knew. His location, age, school, affiliations, interests, all were left unfilled. I remembered his email address and tried Googling that, since he hadn't given me his name. Anons24@kss.edu.com. Anon S, was that his name? Anon, what kind of name was that? Nonetheless I looked it up, but the search results were none but random, useless sites that had nothing to do with the Rogue. I tried a couple more times, using his screen name as keywords, but nothing of use surfaced. His messenger contact card was blank as well, and his email profiles were either empty or inactive. It was as if he didn't even exist. I was in for a surprising discovery the next day. That guy's staring at you. Ino pointed out, slightly nodding her head over my shoulder towards the gravel fields. My initial guess had been Gara, watching me again, until Ino added, very cute. What's up with the hair, though? It looks like a porcupine. Instantly, I turned towards the direction she'd been pointing at. By the end of elementary school, I was enrolled in this private middle school conservatory that was located within the core of downtown Konoha, in the first 3 floors of a high-tower financial building. Because my family and I had just recently moved in, the place was new to us, and my parents were initially uncomfortable with the idea of sending their 11-year-old preteen daughter to study in the midst of the hectic, on-the-go city life with speeding cars and a high crime rate. But it was about the only decent choice of school that they had, and after a jumble of entry exams and interviews, I was accepted in. It was a nerd school, everyone was neat freak, excessively polite, and whoever got remotely close to anything below an A was considered stupid. But the school apparatus was high-classed, there were tons of field trips, classrooms were large and the student population wasn't overflowing. Therefore most of us considered ourselves higher than the mainstream schools, specifically the elementary/junior high school that was a few blocks away. On occasion, our school and that mainstream school down the road mixed together in either tournament games or major events. No one liked it. We considered ourselves superior to the opposing school, while they considered themselves more experienced, worldlier, because they studied in a normal public school. I thought they were only dissing themselves. But it was on one of those occasions that I first heard of Uchiha Sasuke from the public school kids. In the beginning, I heard the basics. Tall, dark and handsome. The legend. Mysterious. Quiet. Coolest boy in school. A genius. But after a few months, it turned into gossip. Parents dead. Family dead. Brother gone missing. Left alone. Stupid mistakes. Petty theft. Caught cheating exams. Fights. Detention. A screw-up. I had wondered at that time whether the rumors were true. Despite that I had never actually seen this Sasuke in person, I hadn't even known for sure whether he really existed. It wasn't long though, until proof appeared before my eyes. It was a blazing weekday afternoon, and I was one of the last students to leave because I had extracurriculums after school. The streets were nearly deserted, with all the students gone home and all the workers in their jobs already. I strolled lightly down the sidewalk, headed home, until, "Why are you all alone, Uchiha?" A taunting voice spoke, coming from just around the corner I was closely approaching. "Everyone abandoned you or something. Don't you dare talk about my brother." A new foreign voice said monotonously, yet threateningly. When I reached the corner where the street had swerved sharply to the right, I peered around slowly and quietly. Less than 100 feet away, 3 boys stood unmoving on the path ahead. The 2 bigger, older boys were positioned on either side of the shorter, self-secluded one whose back was the only part one could see from where I stood. "Oh, that subject's still pretty taboo, huh? Why the hell deny it, though? Everyone knows the guy's a murderer." "Shut up. Your brother probably knew the cops were cluing in. Now he's gone. What kind of loser runs away like that?" "Shut up. He isn't a loser. And he'll come back." The taller boy, who was called Abumi, perhaps 14 years of age, scoffed. "For you. I bet he won't." "Shut up. Just shut up." The younger boy yelled. Clearly, he was struggling to keep his cool. "You're such a baby." Finally, he lost his temper. He ran towards the Abumi dude and threw himself at him, who was much taller and looked more skilled than he was. Quickly, the other boy, Abumi's friend, I supposed, who wore a strange fur jacket and a mummy-like mask despite the heat of the afternoon, grabbed hold of him, and using his arms hooked and restrained the young boy's shoulders from behind. He struggled futilely. Abumi was back up instantly and began punching the younger boy in the stomach, and hard. He didn't stand a chance. It was 2 against 1. I contemplated whether or not to help, but decided that there was nothing I could do anyway. I watched helplessly as Abumi landed endless blows on the boy's torso. "You're a weakling." He sneered at the young boy's face, laughing bitterly. "Who'd want to look after a weakling? You're freaking pathetic." Then, in a lower voice that I barely caught, he whispered, "This is what your so-called legendary brother has been teaching you. How to be a loser." The next had happened too fast. The boy broke free of the wrapped like a mummy dude's grasp and landed a hard hit on his face that sent him to the ground. His amount of strength surprised me. The boy then grabbed a hold of Abumi's fist, rotating him and grabbing the other one so that he grasped both arms from behind. Then, without warning, he raised a foot and stepped on his captive's back, stretching his arms back in a painful and unnatural manner. Abumi screamed. The younger boy smirked, and whispered hatefully, "Now who's the weakling?" He stretched the other boy's arms further, pulling at his arms at the same time as stepping on his back. Abumi screamed louder. My eyes widened, and instinctively, before I had time to think about it, I interfered. "Don't!" I yelled. The action hadn't done much, but managed to have the boy turn in my direction. He looked at me, first with surprised eyes that soon turned perplexed, like he was wondering what I was doing there, and perhaps how long I've been watching. Knowing I had at least some of his attention, I yelled again, "You're hurting him." He looked back down at the screaming boy in his grasp, and a look flashed in his eyes as if it was only then realization of his actions dawned to mind. Promptly, he let go of the older boy, shoving him to the ground in a disgusted manner. Without another word, he shoved his hands in his pockets and walked away. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. Abumi, who apparently still hadn't learned his lesson, muttered as he walked past, "Coward. No wonder your brother left you." After a short pause, he added, "No wonder everyone left you." In a flash, the younger boy had jumped onto the other lad and both fell down on the ground. "You bastard." The younger one exploded. Grabbing the other boy's head, he slammed it onto the sidewalk, repeatedly. Abumi, who was previously struggling, stopped moving altogether, and everything about him suddenly became very still. Perhaps the only thing moving was the crimson liquid that seeped out from underneath his head, smearing all over the pavement. I didn't gasp. I didn't huff. In fact, I couldn't breathe at all. "What did you do?" I said quietly, but he had heard it. He looked up, remembering that I was still there. With shaking knees, I turned and ran away. I had run back to school for help. Panting, I burst into the staff lounge, a place where students were forbidden, and screamed of what happened. It took 2 teachers to finally calm me down. It wasn't long before they called 911. I remained in the staff lounge for a few moments to settle down my nerves. When I came back to the place of incident, an ambulance had just pulled away, wailing loudly as it sped down the road. A police car flashed its red and blue lights not far away, and 2 cops were present. One was talking to an old woman, apparently a witness, typically dressed with a shirt and a honey peach robe, while another was directing a handcuffed boy into the vehicle. Just before he was fully shoved inside the police car, my eyes caught him for an entire second. They were obsidian, completely dark, and specks of blue or purple would sometimes be visible when they sparkled in the sunlight. But despite its awing beauty, no one can miss the evident frustration and regret that tainted them. The other boy with Abumi, the mummy-wrapped one that had been thrown to the ground, suffered a minor concussion that basically knocked him out for the whole time. His name was Dosu something, now currently a senior student and a bad one in the Hidden Leaves. Abumi, on the other hand, had been pretty much doomed to be crippled for the rest of his life. Both arms had been fractured and dislocated, but that was the least of his injuries. He had suffered brain damage due to direct impact on hard cement, part of his skull had cracked, and afterwards suffered some mental and physical disabilities. The younger kid had been, surprise surprise, Uchiha Sasuke. I didn't know what happened to him afterwards. Seeing as he was now part of a program meant for kids either expelled from school or charged for violent dispositions, Sasuke's life had obviously only taken turns from bad to worse after that incident. My parents were horrified after they were debriefed. I ended up spending only half a year in middle school before we moved to what they called a much more peaceful environment in the uptown suburbs, which was still our same residence at the moment. I never saw Sasuke again after that. Until now. He was approaching. And fast. The very first thing I noticed was the somewhat darkened patch around his left eye, which I recognized immediately was the bruise I'd given him a few days ago. Being able to sight it from a pretty far distance, I have to admit my blow on him must have been harder than I realize. A small sense of triumph tingled within me. "Hey!" Sasuke greeted all of a sudden, and I slightly jolted in surprise to find him a mere yard away from me already. Silently, without responding, I stared at him. He scratched the back of his head. It was quite adorable, actually. You know, us. We should make up. And, stop screwing each other every single day. And, he paused, realizing his previous statement. Wait. Shit, no, I didn't mean it like that, damn it. I raised an eyebrow. How amusing. I had to purse my lips to prevent chuckling. Sasuke held his hands up in front of me with open palms, as if in a motion to stop me from, I would suppose, walking away. Just let me try this again. I thought maybe we got off on the wrong start, these past couple of days. Past couple of days, I repeated. We got off on the wrong start 4 years ago, Sasuke. He twitched. Yeah, well, before doesn't count. Of course it does, I argued. In fact, that's the one that counts the most. It was like the initiating incident of everything. It does count. Okay, fine, he renounced, obviously annoyed, it counts. Whatever. So you're apologizing for that too? No, He snapped, "This has nothing to do with that. That's history. And I never ever did anything to you anyway. You had me traumatized. At the sight of a little blood. It was not little. There was a whole lake of it. I had nightmares for months. My parents even got me to shrink. And it's my fault you're such a naive little girl who's never had a paper cut. No, but it's your fault you're such a screw-up." He narrowed his eyes at me, "You're impossible. Truly. I'm trying here, okay. But you turn down every single chance of us having an actual decent conversation. We've had decent conversations before." I told him. "I didn't know who you were, yet. That's different. I'm sure." I started in a deadpan manner. Briskly, I walked away, wishing in my mind that Ino hadn't left me all alone with the Uchiha. Just as I reached the entrance doors of the Fine Arts building, I heard a call, "Hey." Turning, I saw Sasuke only a foot or less away from me and closing in, and surprised by the sudden proximity, I backed away. He continued moving in until I hit the corner beside the doors, and then placed one hand on the wall beside my head, while another near my waist. "What the hell are you doing?" I asked. "Listen, this is really getting stupid, okay?" he said. He sounded fed up. "Tell me about it. I've been pinned thrice in a single week." I replied nonchalantly. "That's not what I'm talking about." "Then what are you talking about?" "A truce. Between us. I'd like one." It didn't seem like it. He was glaring his eyes out. "Are you apologizing?" I asked, astonished. He scoffed. "Are you stupid or what?" Translation. "Yes." Blushing, I barked, "Stop calling me stupid. I'm way smarter than you. Academically, yeah. But there's a difference between school smart and world reality general life smart. You're not gonna last 5 minutes in the streets, trust me. You're not very convincing for someone supposedly asking for a truce. You have a lot of guts for someone who clearly has the disadvantage. Just 'cause I'm shorter, smaller, most likely weaker, and a girl, does not mean I'm at a disadvantage. Ever heard of the term, inner strength? No. But I've heard of, small and terrible. Depends. We're okay. If it means you'd get off me. We won't fight anymore. Fine. You won't annoy the hell out of me. I don't think that's within my control." I smiled sarcastically. He smirked. "Didn't think so, either. So we're okay, right?" "Sure," I replied, looking away. I was hesitant as to how long I could keep up our ceasefire. Disliking Sasuke seemed to be based more on impulse than choice. I stumbled upon Sasuke again the next afternoon on my spare block, although this time I didn't think it was by chance, nor by obligation. I had a spare block that day, and having all my detention hours paid off, now presently crushed by endless missed assignments, I sat under a tree near the edges of our school's very own private woodland, given that Konoha's municipality was more or less made up of trees serenely unaccompanied. Serenely unaccompanied, that is, until Uchiha Sasuke showed up, in a way that almost seemed he intended to come here, and as I've said, not by chance, nor by obligation. Alone and enveloped by scattered, unorganized papers, I was organized most days. Today was not part of that extent. I must have looked strange to him. Approaching, and sweating a great deal for some reason, he said, "What are you doing?" "Homework packages." I spat the phrase hatefully. Note that it's plural. He raised an eyebrow, his left, the one shaded by the bruise. I explained, "It's work that I've missed on each of my classes while I spent time in detention, slowly losing my mind as I stare and stare and stare for the stupid clock to move on already." At about the same time, you were grounded at home, in bed, playing PS3, or We Are Guitar Hero, or whatever it is guys do when slacking off. Tell me, how fair is that? He shrugged and plopped down beside me, which was surprising. "Just so you know," he said, "I didn't just stay home and slack off. You disappeared. You're never in school. I never saw you around anymore." This time, both eyebrows rose as he looked at me. You noticed. I blushed immediately, and immediately as well, he saw it. Smirking, he changed the subject. I wasn't allowed out except for school and work. When the guys go to the academy, it's mostly for play. Can't do that. I had to listen to Kakashi rattle on about self-control. You have a job? I asked, unable to conceal the surprise in the voice. He replied proudly. I help out Kakashi sometimes, at the station. Sometimes I clean, sometimes I do the boring paperwork no one wants to do. It's not much, but it's a start. I'm saving up. Oh. We fell into silence for a minute. Then, just to fill in the stillness, I asked, so what are you doing out here? Where's the rest of your posse? He nodded into the deep green of trees, in the woods. We're playing capture the flag. Oh. I said again. What are you doing here? He shrugged. I needed a rest. I stared at him. And I saw you. I thought maybe, I don't know. I didn't know what else there was to say. We were silent once again, and every second that passed made it more and more awkward, to me, at least. Sasuke, on the other hand, seemed more at ease than I was. He stared distantly at the ground before him, seemingly very interested at each blade of grass. My eyes were soon drawn to his left eye, or rather, the area around it. A nasty bruise flaunted itself noticeably against Sasuke's more or less, with more being the most likely good-looking features. The contusion's shade was a mixture of purple and blue, as well as a number of black specks unevenly scattered on it. It was disgusting, in a way, but upon Sasuke's face, it didn't look as bad. But it sure as heck looked painful. The fact that I'd been the one who'd done that damage had yet to sink in. Suddenly, I realized I'd been staring in the most obvious manner, and I could only hope I wasn't gaping, in what seemed to be for the longest time. But before I could draw my gaze away, Sasuke turned to look at me. What? Does it hurt? I asked bluntly. He didn't need further explanation. But the way I stared so intently at his black eye, it was pretty obvious what I was referring to. He shrugged. It doesn't anymore, not really. It hurt over the weekend, though. It hurts like hell. Oh. What's wrong with me? Did I not know any other reply except, oh. On the other hand, what was I supposed to say if a boy known for his rough and tough reputation had just admitted that I short and weak was physically able to hurt him? I mean, that was some hit. He muttered. I smirked, unable to resist as he was basically admitting that I had won and he lost. You've got one hell of a temper, you know. Yeah, I grinned, I know. Name. Sasuke Uchiha. Networks. Konoha Secondary School. Konoha, JP. Matches. Name. When I arrived at the graphic comms classroom, it was almost on impulse that I'd gone on Facebook, despite any activity non-associated with schoolwork was inadmissible, as the very first thing I did once the computer had finished loading. Without much thought, I went on profile search and had typed in, Uchiha Sasuke. The results had come up promptly and by the next second, my eyes were glued without a known cause upon the window screen that intrepidly exhibited Sasuke's profile picture. It was a vertically rectangular picture, slightly blurred, like a meager image taken by a webcam. Sasuke, at the main focus, sat on the ground with his elbows resting upon his bent knees, hands clasped together composedly. Although his head was bowed in a slight angle, concealing some parts of his face, his eyes as dark as obsidian, speckled with blue and purple looked up and was staring straight at the camera, his gaze direct and intense. Wow. For someone so reserved and half the time unfeeling, I never knew Sasuke was such a poser. Or maybe he wasn't, I thought over. Maybe he was just naturally photogenic, and with his alluring appearance, possessed some kind of secret innate ability in being picturesque. But, either way, it was still a shock to find Uchiha Sasuke taking self-pictures, him of all people. It was such a shock that the news was almost laughable. And it was. In the midst of awe and the process of drooling, I couldn't help but chuckle at the thought of Sasuke posing for the camera. Or he probably didn't need to pose. He probably only had to look at the lenses and, by some inborn miracle, actually look good without any effort. Finally, I tore my eyes away from the immobile picture of Sasuke of which I'd been staring at for the longest minutes and pointed my mouse over the text on the right-hand side of the box. Add to friends. I thought about it for a moment, and then quickly moved away from the pointer. What am I thinking? We weren't even friends. We barely ever talked. Adding Sasuke would make me look like some stalker, as if surfing up his profile and staring at his picture wasn't already stalker-like enough, and it would seem too desperate. Absent-mindedly, I clicked on home, more for a distraction before I had second thoughts about not adding the certain someone. I got my distraction all right. At the very first of the news feed was a notification of a new post on my wall sent earlier this morning. Who was that? Immediately, the Uchiha fumbled for the mouse and minimized the opened messenger window. But he was a second too late. Gaara had already seen the display icon on the top right-hand corner of the window. It was a picture of Sakura, her light hair messily styled, grinning stupidly yet sweetly at the camera. "You've been chatting with Sakura. The chick with the pink hair." "Yeah," Uchiha said abruptly. "So? Nothing." Gaara replied nonchalantly, and pretended not to notice the Uchiha's penetrating gaze that was focused on him. "You know her email." Uchiha's eyes narrowed slightly. "What is it? Why do you want to know? You don't even know Sakura." "Yes, I do. I walked her home yesterday." The statement seemed to have an effect on the Uchiha. He twitched. Gaara held a small smirk, which he knew bothered the so-called prodigy for some strange reason. "You got a problem with that?" Grudgingly, the Uchiha stood up and marched away from the only computer in the house. "No. So you don't mind if I note down her email?" The Uchiha walked past him, and their shoulders brushed harshly. "I don't care." Once the Uchiha was out of audible range, Gaara muttered, "Yeah, right.